Hi all, welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be talking about the history behind playing cards. So it's actually believed that playing cards originated somewhere in Asia, and one of the most popular theories is actually that they were invented in China in the 9th century AD, when China was currently being ruled by the Tang dynasty. I mean, there's even suggestions that playing cards were actually originally the currency used when betting in certain games. But obviously, there's no way to be sure of this, considering that we've got barely any written records, and, well, playing cards don't actually survive for 1,000 years, either buried underground or even above ground. They basically rot away. But before playing cards actually reached Europe, it's quite likely that they actually passed through the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. So the decks there would be made up of suits of coins, sticks, swords, and goblets. And these were most likely chosen because they were these were at least prominent objects in Mamluk society at the time. And these are actually decently similar to the suits that we then find in Italy past the 14th century. So the first reference to playing cards usage in Europe is actually found in a manuscript written by the Swiss monk Johannes in Latin in 1377. And at the time, a 52 card deck would be used to play various card games. But most, if probably not all, included some kind of gambling. It actually wasn't uncommon to see these card games denounced in religious services alongside other dice games, obviously all involving gambling, and this was quite frowned upon by the church at the time. And the four suits we find in Italy at this point are cups, clubs, swords, and coins. And they do seem to be quite similar to the ones found in Egypt, hence that theory arises that they passed through Egypt before reaching Europe. The royal cards that we find in Italian decks actually seem to be a mounted king, a seated queen, and a knave, who is the equivalent of a modern day jack and is seen to be a royal servant. And these, what we would call today Latin suits, are actually still used in Italy and Spain. In Spain, the royal cards used actually slightly differ. We see a knight instead of a queen, and also an absence of the number 10 for some reason. So cards then moved on to Germany from this point. And the Germans actually invented their own suits to go on the cards, as they wanted to establish their own card types for manufacturing. So these suits were made up of hawk bells, hearts, acorns, and leaves. And these were more symbolic of a rural life that Germans might be more likely to live at this point. The queen, as part of the royal deck, was also replaced by two knaves, named an Obermann and an Untermann, which I suppose means an overman and an underman. And rather than an ace being the highest card, the card for two actually became the highest card. Germany actually played quite a major role in modernising the production of these playing cards though, and as it already had a relatively large domestic printing industry, mostly due to the church wanting to have some kind of religious imagery, they were actually able to use this to produce larger quantities of playing cards, and then these were exported to the rest of Western Europe. And over time, Germanic suits actually replaced the Italian suits as the most common throughout Europe. But then the cards reached France. And the French suits that were developed actually in the early 1400s, and they're responsible for the suits that we actually have to this day. So hearts, spades, diamonds, and clubs, although they weren't exactly that because it was in French, right? So clubs and spades may have derived from the acorns and leaves found in the Germanic suits, respectively. But there is also there's some weight in the belief that there was a progression of the playing cards westward throughout Europe as well. And as today, the royal cards consisted of a king, a queen, and a jack. And the French were actually the ones to introduce the red and black colour scheme, which we all know so well today. And they simplified the symbols that would be found on the cards. And therefore, with advancements in stencils and printing, France was able to overtake Germany as the leading producer of playing cards in Europe. And then later on in the 1500s, manufacturers actually started to associate some of these royal cards with famous historical figures. So the kings, for example. The king of diamonds is seen to be Julius Caesar, the king of clubs, Alexander the Great, the king of hearts, Charlemagne, and the king of spades, King David. But then after this, the playing cards actually made their way to England, through Belgian manufacturers and exporters mainly. There was also quite a large industry in Rouen, a city in Normandy, and this was an on and off part of the Kingdom of England, depending on whether or not the French had reconquered it or the English had taken it back. And the reason for the Ace of Spades actually being the highest card in our modern day deck is the fault of the English. So an act was passed by government that playing cards were not able to leave their factories until a tax had been paid on them. And this meant that the Ace of Spades had to be hand stamped before they could leave the factory. This was to show that the tax had been paid on them. And in the face of prevalent tax evasion, so people finding a way around this system, it was then decided that no one could buy an Ace of Spades except for commissioners for stamp duties. No one could buy them from manufacturers directly. They had to go through these commissioners for stamp duties. So obviously that's not very efficient. It was quite annoying to get your hands on the Ace of Spades, so they may have got slightly rarer. And it was actually only in 1862 when manufacturers were then able to directly sell the Ace of Spades to customers again. And it was actually the English as well that standardized, or mainly standardized, the art that you'd find on the cards. So a lot of the modern designs are based off of Thomas de la Rue's designs, since he was one of the people who was able to reduce the price of playing cards and also mass produce them. Another cool fact, the English were also the ones to invent the double-ended court cards, which became a thing to prevent the other players from knowing that you had a king, queen, or a jack, since if they weren't double-edged, then you'd have to turn them around in your hand, and obviously then the other players would know that you had one of the royal cards. And then finally, the cards reached America. So the Americans didn't have too much influence on what the cards looked like, but they were very important in boosting the production of cards throughout factories. And they were also responsible for the creation of the Joker. And that just about sums up the origins of the cards that we know today. So if you enjoyed this video, I would please like you to like and subscribe, because it does really help the channel. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.